Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Lindsey series. This is the biggest district in Lincolnshire, containing 188 civil parishes. Without further ado, here's today's offering. Hello folks, welcome back to East Lindsey again, and again we're in the vicinity of Grimsby. Now get ready for a big one, a big village right on the southern edge of this northern Lincolnshire town. Its name is Holton le Clay. The East Lindsey series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop, located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Holton le Clay, Hill Spur Farmstead in the Clay. Hello again East Lindsey, and hello again Grimsby. I'm willing to bet if you live in the southern reaches of the port town, you may well be familiar with this place. Located just off the A16 between Grimsby and Boston is the large village of Holton le Clay, a residential suburb-like settlement, or it is these days at least. Holton le Clay was once a tiny hamlet, but such was the speed of Grimsby's expansion over the last century, it's now more than 3 times the size. There are some really good landmarks here though, it's not all modern suburbia. The most obvious is the former railway line, which swiped its way through Halton from Grimsby to Louth. Halton had 2 stations on it, one in the village and one to the south. We'll see what remains of one of them in this episode. Another standout feature of this place is its village hall, named the Hornets Nest in honour of the RAF squadron that flew from a nearby airfield. There are 3 pubs, 2 playing fields and a gorgeous church that dates back to the 11th century. And the whole thing is twinned with the suburb of Sarges-le-Lemon in Sarthe, northwestern France. People love living here, and 2 famous ones once did: scientist Richard Collins and parasport athlete Holly Arnold. It's a great place, all ends up. Let's go and see why. We begin this lengthy walk at the Jug and Bottle, one of 3 pubs in Holton le Clay. Of the 3, this is the one you'd most likely come to if you were after food, because it has a carvery. It's a family favourite too, because in 2016 it became part of the Stonehouse chain, whose speciality is pizza. The Jug and Bottle is part of the Peacefield Business Park, which is right at Holton's southernmost tip. It's an industrial estate primarily, but it also has a day nursery and a kids club, and the North Thoresby medical practice. It's fair to say this area sees a high volume of traffic, all things considered. At this point you may also spot this map, which shows every street in the village. I reckon every village should have one of these, they're so helpful. Visitors to Holton may wish to use it if they've just alighted from the number 51 bus, the service that connects Grimsby to Boston. That bus uses Louth Road to get around the village. Years ago, Louth Road was the main way around the village. The A16, which sweeps its way past Halton these days, is much newer, and most traffic bypasses the place to the west. There are plenty of reasons to come to Holton le Clay though. So let's go and find some, shall we? Halton has 2 recreational spaces. Off Louth Road is a short footpath which runs into the Halton Junior playing field, designed specifically for young children. It occupies a small, flat grassed area that sits in the middle of a housing estate. In recent years, this has been given a facelift with the addition of some brand new play equipment. In one corner there's a bug hotel with a few information boards about some of the wildlife you can find within it. Quite interesting. Out of the gate on the other side and we're into the housing estate. Let's make our way around this to a school next. Holton le Clay has 2 schools, one is an infants, the other is a juniors. This is the latter. Both work in partnership with each other, meaning Holton's infants automatically gravitate to this. Holton's older children attend Waltham Tollbar Academy or other schools in Louth. Holton's original school still stands. It was a tiny building and could only hold 72 children. There's no way it could have coped with the numbers the modern schools do now. This route will pass it later. There is a dedicated Facebook group for those who grew up attending Holton schools. I've linked it below if that's you. Well, so far so good. I've enjoyed this walk up to now. It's been nice and sunny up there, so that's always a help. And it's just been lovely, hasn't it? Haven't seen anything that's untoward, shall we say. Now we're going in search now of the other playing field. We've come across the junior playing field. There is a much bigger playing field. We continue up this street past the school, take a left turn down a footpath that will take us towards that playing field. We'll get across that and then we're into another housing estate. Certainly Holton le Clay is one of those places that's definitely residential for the most part. To reach the second playing field we have to use a side street. You have a choice of which, but I went for Magnolia Drive. At the end of the road you get a good look at the surrounding farmland. Somewhere down there is Waith Watermill, which you may recall from the Waith episode. It falls within Holton's parish boundaries. Now we're on 8 acres field, and there's no mystery to this name. It's a field and it's 8 acres big. A significant green space for the village, this has an array of football pitches, a BMX track and a hard play area, and the whole thing is bounded by mature hedges and trees. Speaking of trees, this one was planted in memory of the NHS and key workers who lost their lives during the COVID-19 pandemic. Down one side of 8 acres is an old railway cutting. We're familiar with this because in New Waltham we walked along part of it. The line, for those who haven't seen that episode, was the East Lincolnshire branch of the Great Northern Railway. Holton le Clay had 2 stations on it. One was an actual station located south of the village, whilst the other was an unmanned halt. In its later years, the line was for freight traffic only and was last used in 1980. If you want to know how steep that is, I had to come down on my hands and knees. Yeah, it's not exactly easy. So if you do follow this exact route, just beware of that bit. Very slippery, very muddy. But yeah, the route shall continue. This next area is all residential again. This is the Langton Road estate south of Tetney Lane. It was added to the village in the 1960s and has a number of cul-de-sacs coming off a series of arterial roads. Its design gives visitors the impression of space, having green spaces, grass verges and broad pavements. The properties are well spaced too. Most are detached or semi-detached houses or bungalows. There are 2 famous people who have lived in Halton, by the way. One is scientist and author Richard Collins and the other is parasport javelinist Holly Arnold. Both now live elsewhere. On the sport theme, next up we have Holton le Clay Cricket Club, located up a track off Tetney Lane. In addition to providing a base for both cricket and football teams, this is also a go-to place for village events. Every year, the club hosts Holton Rocks, which is a showcase of independent artists. Since its launch in 2010, the event, which culminates in a firework display, has attracted thousands of visitors. Proceeds from it have been used to develop the facilities and to support local charities. Now we need to follow a footpath which crosses a field, and this will take us towards the church. Halton has an abundance of public rights of way. This one we're on here is perhaps one of the lesser used, but recent surveys have revealed that Halton's residents value them all. As well as the easy access to the public footpath network, many also cited the open views and outlooks as reasons why they love to live here. People also feel a strong sense of community and feel safe to walk around the village too, which is always a good thing. There are several buildings which pull the whole community together. The oldest and perhaps most iconic here is the lovely church of St. Peter, and that's next. This Grade 2 listed Anglican building consists of a chancel, a nave and an embattled tower with 3 bells. It's built of coursed and squared ironstone and limestone rubble. It forms part of a united benefice with the churches of St Nicholas in Northcotes and St Peter and St Paul in Tetney. The tall and thin tower arch dates to the 11th century, whilst the square tower, chancel and nave arch are of Saxon or very early Norman date. St Peter's was partly rebuilt in 1850 by William Hay and last restored and repaired in 1868. The churchyard also has a 14th century standing stone cross. And of course we've got the familiar site of the war memorial here in the churchyard too, erected by the parishioners of Holton le Clay in memory of those who fell in the Great War from 14 to 19. And of course there's also some poppy wreaths on the floor too. There's a plaque above those that says, "More than conquers through him that loved us." This is Church Lane, which is a continuation of Tetney Lane. Along here there's a collection of other amenities all huddled together in one area. This wooden building used to be one of them. It was the church hall years ago and later became a photographer's studio. According to my sources, it also became the venue used for breakfast and after-school clubs by Holton le Clay Infant School next door. The former Rainbow Corner Kids Club is amongst these buildings too. Of course, that's now based on Peacefield Business Park. And rounding off this gaggle of buildings here is the police station, in your shot now. We can get the parish notice board out of the way here because it's sited in front of them all. Mark it off, people. Next we have Pinfold Lane, where there's a row of shops. This includes a family bar called the Holt, which is the newest of the 3 pubs in Holton le Clay. It comprises 2 separate units that are currently up for sale. One is a bar and the other is a takeaway. Holton le Clay certainly isn't short of the latter. Including the Holt, 3 of them can be found right here in this parade of shops, which also includes a co-op store and a hairdresser's. Every resident here is looked after admirably. Also on Pinfold Lane is the Village Hall, which used to be a pub called the Etherington Arms until the parish council renovated it in 2014. The hall often goes by a different name these days, the Hornets Nest, and that has a wartime connection. Part of the former RAF Grimsby or Waltham airfield falls within Halton's boundaries. Number 100 Squadron who flew from there were nicknamed the Hornets. This also explains the bomber aircraft depicted on the sign outside the venue. That's a nice touch. Next we're off down Campion's Close, which is a dead end, but not if you're on foot. Via a short linkway you can get to Peppercorn Walk. This was one of my favourite little areas in Halton. This building is the old school, the predecessor to the modern Halton Infants and Juniors. Now converted into apartments, it's one of the village's more characterful properties. Not far away is a mud and stud cottage on Peppercorn Garth, and also nearby is a chiropractic clinic. This used to be the former parish offices. The whole area used to be known as the Smooting, and it faces Louth Road where there's a garage, because every decent sized residential village needs one of those. Pub number 3 now, the Royal Oak. Of the 3 watering holes in Halton, it's this which could lay claim to being the most traditional. It is, after all, the oldest. It's also recently gained a brand new outdoor bar based around an old shipping container. It's called Route 68 because the Royal Oak is number 68 Louth Road. Now, how big do you like your post boxes? This gigantic effort from the time of George V is dead opposite the pub. If you're wondering where the post office is located, that's inside the co-op store on Pinfold Lane. And speaking of shops, there's one final row to have a look at. Okay, we're into the final stretch of the walk now, and there's a nice smell floating across the air here because there's a Chippy in this row of shops which we're about to pass. Let's go and check that out then, shall we? This row includes the former Culbeck's hardware store, which is now occupied by a cafe called Four Candles. It's a play on words attributed to the famous Two Ronnies comedy sketch as a tribute to the building's former purpose. There's also a Morrison's Daily here as well, and a bit further up the road is the source of that gorgeous smell, Holton Chippy. They do say you can't beat a Grimsby fish, and I have to agree. You lot who live here are so lucky. All that remains now is to make our way back to the start. It's all residential from this point onwards, so here's one final montage to wrap this one up. Okay, so we've made it to the bus stop near the surgery where we began, and that's the walk around Holton le Clay. Now, before we leave this one behind, there is one more thing I would like to talk about, and that's a railway station. You see, we've already seen the old railway cutting, but there used to be a station here as well. It wasn't called Holton le Clay though, it was called Tetney. Let's go and find it. Well, at least that's what I thought at the time. You see, the station had a bit of a confusing history when it came to its name. When it opened in 1848, it was initially known as Holton le Clay and Tetney because it served both villages. Tetney was dropped soon after opening, even though the station was more conveniently sited for that village. So in actual fact, it was for most of its life Holton le Clay railway station and not Tetney. It consisted of staggered platforms either side of a level crossing. It also had a signal box which controlled the crossing and a small goods yard served by a single siding which ended at a cattle dock. The station house, built in the same style as those at Fotherby Holt and Utterby Holt, stood in the northeastern corner of the yard. The platforms have now been demolished, but the station house, crossing gates and old cattle dock, which is now an industrial vehicle depot, have survived. And that's it. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Let's do another one next week, shall we? Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.